Shawn Hornbeck, who vanished more than 4 years ago, and this, Ben Ownby. He disappeared on Monday. Tonight, they are back with their families after being found together inside a home in Kirkwood, Missouri.
I still feel like I'm in a dream, only this time it's a good dream. It's not my nightmare that I've lived for 4.5 years. We've got a lot of catching up to do.
I've lived 2 lives. I had to start over again from when I was kidnapped. That life's gone, so I'm picking up this life again.
Someone at a Kirkwood, Missouri apartment complex ID'd a pickup truck placed at the scene of Ownby's abduction. When officers showed up, Ownby and Hornbeck were in 41-year-old Michael Devlin's apartment. Devlin is charged with kidnapping.
We had information that there was a 15-year-old boy in this apartment, and we were just saying, wouldn't that be something if that was Shawn? In fact, Lieutenant Marquardt with the Highway Patrol said, wouldn't that be something if it was Shawn Hornbeck? And it's just unbelievable that it was.
It was supposed to be a routine police stop at a quiet Kirkwood apartment complex. Investigators were desperately searching for 13-year-old Ben Ownby, abducted just days prior, but when they forced the door open, they stepped into a living nightmare. Sitting on the couch wasn't just Ben. Beside him sat an older teenager playing video games. When asked his name, the boy uttered 2 words that sent a blood-chilling shockwave across the nation. Shawn had vanished without a trace over 4 agonizing years ago. What happened behind that closed door is a twisted tale of survival, and the terrifying truth is, the nightmare was only just beginning. Richwoods, Missouri was the kind of tight-knit rural community where kids rode their bicycles until the streetlights came on, and families left their doors unlocked. At the heart of this small town was 11-year-old Shawn Hornbeck. Shawn was a vibrant, energetic kid with a bright, crooked smile known to everyone around him as a boy full of life. His absolute pride and joy was his neon green mountain bike. He spent countless hours pedaling down those familiar country roads, feeling the wind against his face. But despite his adventurous spirit, Shawn was an incredibly responsible child. He and his mother had agreed on a strict curfew 5 p.m. sharp, and he never missed it. It wasn't just a rule. It was a testament to how deeply he loved and respected his family. He was a good kid, simply living out his childhood. October 6, 2002 started like any other crisp, peaceful Sunday. At around 1 p.m., Shawn pedaled out of his driveway, wearing an orange Little League t-shirt, heading out to visit a friend who lived just a short distance away. He took a route he had traveled 100 times before, pedaling steadily near Highway 47. It was broad daylight. It should have been completely safe, but a predator was already circling, hunting for an opportunity. As Shawn rode down that isolated stretch of road, the roaring engine of a battered white pickup truck shattered the afternoon silence. The truck suddenly closed in and collided heavily with Shawn, causing the 11-year-old boy to tumble from his familiar green bicycle. The stranger stepped out, but not to offer help. He forced the boy into the vehicle with a cold demeanor and a dangerous object he had on him. He cruelly stated that Shawn was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and forced the boy to obey unconditionally if he wanted to stay safe. Dazed, in pain, and utterly confused, Shawn looked up, likely expecting the driver to rush over in a panic to offer help. Instead, the horrifying reality of his nightmare began to unfold. A looming, massive figure stepped out of the truck. The man didn't reach out a hand to pull the bleeding child up from the asphalt. He reached for his waistband. "Get in the truck," the man growled, pulling out a gun and aiming it directly at the terrified boy. Shawn, trembling on the ground, his heart pounding out of his chest, looked up at the stranger and asked a question that would break any parent's heart. "Why are you doing this?" The man's response was ice cold, completely devoid of any human empathy. "You were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Do what I say or I will kill you." I gotta be honest with you, thinking about an innocent 11-year-old boy hearing those exact words from a towering monster with a loaded weapon, it absolutely makes my blood boil. It's a level of twisted, sinister cruelty that is hard to even process. Shawn had no choice. Paralyzed by blood-chilling fear, he was shoved into the vehicle. The abductor tossed the crumpled green bike into the bed of the truck and sped away, swallowing Shawn into the dark abyss of a living nightmare. Little did his parents know, as the clock struck 5 p.m. and their son failed to walk through the front door, they wouldn't see their boy again for 4 agonizing years. Back in Richwoods, the hours following that missed 5 p.m. curfew bled into a frantic, terrifying nightmare. For Shawn's parents, the community immediately mobilized, transforming the quiet rural town into a desperate search grid. Tracking dogs scoured the dense woods, helicopters buzzed overhead, and authorities eventually went as far as draining entire lakes, praying they wouldn't find what they were looking for at the bottom. The sheer agony of the unknown was suffocating. That pain was made infinitely worse by cruel dead-end tips and fake psychics who peddled devastating false information to a family desperately clinging to any shred of hope. Every passing day turned the investigation colder, leaving an unbearable void in the community. But while his parents were scouring the earth for him, Shawn was trapped in a completely different kind of hell, hidden in plain sight behind a locked apartment door in Kirkwood. The physical torment he endured was unimaginably brutal. During the initial period of his captivity, Shawn was stripped of all basic freedoms. He was strictly confined and silenced, making it impossible for him to call out for assistance. The young boy was entirely cut off from the outside world, placed under the absolute control of a man who managed every single aspect of his daily survival. However, the physical captivity was only the beginning of a much darker, twisted psychological prison. His abductor didn't just want a victim to hide in the shadows. He sickeningly wanted to play house. Through relentless intimidation and blood-chilling threats to slaughter Shawn's entire family if he ever tried to escape, the captor began a systematic brainwashing process. He sought to completely break the boy's spirit. He forced the terrified child to adopt the last name of his captor, commanding him to introduce himself to unsuspecting neighbors as Shawn Devlin. The 11-year-old was forced into a sickening daily roleplay, acting as the dutiful son to the very monster who had stolen his childhood. Perhaps the most heartbreaking moment of this psychological warfare happened in the digital world. Eventually, his captor allowed him limited, heavily monitored access to a computer. Sitting directly in front of the glowing screen, under the suffocating, watchful gaze of his abductor, Shawn found the missing person website his parents had set up. He saw their desperate pleas. In a terrifying, risky attempt to reach out, Shawn typed a desperate, anonymous message directly to the search page. "How long are you planning to look for your son?" To his devastated parents, who had absolutely no idea it was actually their boy on the other side of the screen. It read like a sick, twisted taunt from a troll. But in reality, it was a profound, devastating cry for help, disguised as a cruel joke, typed by a broken boy who just needed to know if they were still fighting to bring him home. I gotta be honest with you, thinking about an 11-year-old boy being forced into a position where he has to write those exact words to his own parents, does this make your blood boil too? 4 agonizing years crept by, shrouded in silence. By January 2007, Shawn Hornbeck was no longer the small 11-year-old boy who had been snatched off his green mountain bike. He was now a 15-year-old teenager. For the twisted monster holding him captive, Shawn was aging out. The abductor's sickening preferences demanded a younger target, and his dark compulsions took over. The sinister hunt began all over again as he prowled the quiet rural streets. Calculating his next move, he found his target in Beaufort, Missouri. 13-year-old Ben Ownby was everything a parent could be proud of a straight-A student. A dedicated Boy Scout and an incredibly responsible kid who always went straight home after school to play video games. On the freezing afternoon of January 8, 2007, Ben stepped off his school bus at his usual stop, completely unaware that a familiar nightmare was idling just feet away. A battered white pickup truck blocked his path, and in a terrifyingly swift, violent motion, the predator snatched Ben from the street. But monsters, blinded by their own arrogance, eventually slip up. The abductor thought he had executed another flawless kidnapping, completely oblivious to his fatal mistake. Standing just a short distance away was a 15-year-old boy named Mitchell, a friend of Ben's. Mitchell wasn't just a casual observer. He happened to be a massive truck enthusiast. He didn't just see a generic white vehicle speed away. His mind captured the exact details: an older white Nissan pickup. He memorized the camper shell, the missing hubcaps, and the distinct rusting dents over the rear fender. That single, highly observant teenager unknowingly held the key to breaking this entire case wide open. Quick pause here if you appreciate how we break down the facts of these cases and want to help keep these victims' stories alive. Please take a second to hit that subscribe button. Your support allows us to keep digging into the truth. Now, back to the unfolding nightmare. Back at the Ownby household, the silence was becoming unbearable. Ben was a creature of habit. He was always home by 3:45 p.m. A suffocating dread settled over the house. Ben's father, Don, knew instantly that something was horribly wrong. They frantically searched the neighborhood, calling friends and praying to see him walking up the road, but the streets were empty. Panic set in as the sun went down. Ben's father, Don, grabbed the phone, his voice shaking. "Dispatcher, 911, what's your emergency?" "Don, my son is missing. The bus driver seen him get off the bus at Booth Lane approximately 3:30. He never made it home." I gotta be honest, hearing the raw, unfiltered terror in a parent's voice as they realize their absolute worst fear is coming true is completely devastating. The local authorities, recognizing the horrifying gravity of the situation, didn't waste a single second. Armed with Mitchell's meticulous description of the dented white Nissan, an aggressive dragnet was instantly deployed across the county. And then, the chase was on. The disappearance of Ben Ownby triggered an absolutely massive, frantic law enforcement response. The FBI, alongside local sheriffs and highway patrol, launched a desperate race against the clock. In the terrifying world of child abductions, investigators know that the first few hours dictate the difference between a rescue and a recovery. They didn't just canvass the rural roads of Beaufort. They systematically tore the county apart. Crime scene technicians painstakingly poured plaster to cast the distinct tire tracks left in the dirt where the suspect's vehicle had aggressively peeled away. Meanwhile, an Amber Alert blared across Missouri's screens, and authorities began the grueling task of tracking down and screening thousands of white pickup trucks. Days bled into nights, and the nightmare only grew darker. No one could have predicted what happened next. This is where the story takes a completely wild, almost unbelievable turn. 4 days into the agonizing search, 2 local police officers were dispatched to an unassuming apartment complex in Kirkwood, Missouri, nearly an hour away from where Ben was snatched. They weren't there looking for a missing child. They were simply serving an entirely unrelated arrest warrant on a different tenant. But as they walked through the quiet parking lot, something stopped them dead in their tracks. Sitting right there, hiding in plain sight, was a battered white Nissan pickup. It had a camper shell. It was missing its hubcaps. It had a distinct rusted rear fender. It was a flawless 100% match to the meticulous description provided by 15-year-old Mitchell. The vehicle was registered to a 41-year-old man named Michael Devlin, a manager at a local Emo's Pizza. The FBI didn't waste a single second. Heavily armed agents descended on the pizzeria right in the middle of the bustling lunch rush, pulling Devlin outside for a high-stakes interrogation. At first, Devlin played the part of the cooperative, unbothered citizen. He calmly denied knowing anything about a missing 13-year-old boy, his demeanor chillingly detached and arrogant. He thought he was smarter than them, but the seasoned FBI agents knew exactly how to break a predator. Leaning in, they dropped their ace in the hole. They coldly informed Devlin that they had perfectly cast the tire prints from the abduction scene, looking him dead in the eye and telling him it was only a matter of hours before forensics matched those tracks directly to his truck. That was the exact moment the monster cracked. His calm, collected facade completely shattered. Devlin began to sweat profusely, his eyes darting frantically, his breathing turning ragged as he stumbled over his words. The crushing weight of his sinister crimes was finally closing in. I gotta be honest with you, thinking about this completely random stroke of luck officers spotting the truck while on an unrelated call is absolutely mind-blowing. Does it make you wonder how long this monster would have kept getting away with it if fate hadn't intervened? Drop your take in the comments. Do you believe in pure coincidence? Or was someone looking out for those boys? The investigators finally had their suspect. But the horrifying truth is, nothing could have prepared them for the twisted reality waiting behind his locked apartment door. When investigators finally peeled back the layers of Michael Devlin's life, what they found was utterly blood-chilling. The terrifying truth is, Devlin wasn't lurking in dark alleys wearing a ski mask. And he certainly didn't fit the stereotypical profile of a hardened criminal. He didn't have a lengthy rap sheet or any prior history of violence. He came from a decent, supportive family. He was a diligent manager at the local Emo's Pizza, a guy who paid his rent on time, kept his head down, and quietly minded his own business. To the outside world, he was utterly unremarkable. He would serve pizza to families by day and return to his apartment to terrorize children by night. He was the absolute embodiment of the monster next door, hiding his dark, sinister compulsions behind a flawless, mundane facade. But behind the locked door of his Kirkwood apartment, Devlin was a ruthless predator, driven by an insatiable need for total control and extreme domination. He didn't just want to physically trap his victims. His ultimate goal was to completely break their spirits. What he did to Shawn over 4 agonizing years was a profoundly cruel, calculated form of psychological warfare. Devlin didn't just keep the boy chained up. He manipulated him to the core. He forced the terrified child to refer to him as his father, stripping away the boy's true identity. In a twisted display of power, Devlin eventually allowed Shawn to go outside, hang out with neighbors, and even use a cell phone. This wasn't an act of mercy, it was the ultimate sadistic display of dominance. By giving Shawn a sliver of false freedom, Devlin engineered a paralyzing textbook case of Stockholm Syndrome. He had burned a blood-chilling ultimatum into the boy's mind. Obey me and you live. Resist or run, and I will slaughter your entire family. Devlin positioned himself as a supreme, omnipresent force in Shawn's world. The invisible psychological chains of fear he wrapped around that child were far stronger than any physical locks or iron bars. Shawn was trapped in a mental prison so deep, he felt he couldn't even scream for help when standing right out in the open. Fueling this reign of terror was Devlin's staggering, blinding arrogance. He was so drunk on his own perceived brilliance that he didn't even bother to abandon or alter the dented white Nissan pickup he used to snatch Ben off the street. He left the ultimate piece of evidence parked right out in the open in his apartment complex lot. He even routinely chatted and joked around with the local police officers who came in to grab a slice at his pizza parlor. He genuinely believed he was completely untouchable, infinitely smarter than the entire law enforcement system. What struck me the most was his absolute delusion. He didn't just want a victim, he sickeningly tried to play house with the lives he completely destroyed. Armed with Devlin's crumbling, sweat-drenched confession, a tactical team of heavily armed FBI agents and local police sped away from the pizzeria and descended directly upon the quiet apartment complex. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. They didn't know exactly what kind of danger they were walking into, but they knew they were entirely out of time. As the officers stacked up tightly outside the door of Unit D, their hearts pounded in their chests. With adrenaline surging through their veins, they forced the door open, stepping over the threshold into the dark, suffocating lair of a predator. The twisted reality of Michael Devlin's world was an immediate stomach-churning assault on the senses. The apartment was an absolute house of horrors, draped in claustrophobic filth and neglect. The floor was practically invisible, buried under mountains of rotting garbage. Thick clumps of cat hair and animal feces scattered openly across the carpet. The putrid, suffocating smell of decay hung heavy in the air. Later, investigators would seize his computer, uncovering a vile, sickening digital vault of child pornography that fully exposed the depths of his depravity. But in that frantic, chaotic first moment, the officer's eyes were locked entirely on the living room. Sitting there on a worn-out couch, completely surrounded by the squalor, were two teenagers staring at a video game screen. The moment the officers breached the room, the younger boy jolted upright. His wide, terrified eyes locked onto the heavily armed men. It was 13-year-old Ben Ownby. He had only been missing for 4 agonizing days, but the profound trauma etched into his youthful face made it look like an eternity. Recognizing his rescuers, Ben immediately bolted toward the agents. His voice trembled with a devastating mixture of raw fear and desperate, heartbreaking hope as he looked up and asked, "Are you gonna take me home?" Hearing those words, knowing the absolute unthinkable hell he had just endured over the last 96 hours, was enough to shatter the hearts of even the most hardened investigators in the room. They had found him. Ben was safe. But the nightmare was about to take a sudden, mind-bending turn. The agents slowly turned their attention to the older teenage boy still sitting quietly on the couch. He hadn't moved. He hadn't cried out for help. Devlin, stammering and desperate in the hallway, tried to frantically lie to the officers, claiming the teenager was simply his godson. But as the police looked closer at the 15-year-old's face, a chilling, impossible realization washed over the room. When an officer gently asked for his name, the boy quietly uttered 2 words that stopped time itself. Shawn Hornbeck. Grown men, seasoned veterans of law enforcement, who had spent their entire careers seeing the absolute worst of humanity, broke down in tears. Shawn Hornbeck had been swallowed by the earth 4.5 years ago. The community had mourned him. His family had literally drained lakes searching for his remains. Yet, here he was alive. But the horrifying truth is, the boy sitting on that couch was a deeply traumatized shadow of the vibrant 11-year-old who once loved his green mountain bike. The intense psychological torture, the horrific cruelty, and the systematic brainwashing had completely conditioned him to sit in terrifying silence, paralyzed by the invisible chains Devlin had wrapped around his mind. Drop your take in the comments. How would you even begin to process seeing a boy you thought was dead for 4 years, just sitting there? With Michael Devlin finally in handcuffs, the long, grueling pursuit of justice began. The physical and digital evidence against him formed an insurmountable mountain of absolute horror. But prosecutors faced a heartbreaking dilemma. If this massive case went to a drawn-out trial, both Ben and Shawn would be forced to take the witness stand. They would have to sit in a cold public courtroom, look the monster who stole their innocence dead in the eye, and painfully relive every agonizing second of their nightmare for the world to hear. The authorities were absolutely determined not to let Devlin victimize these innocent boys a second time. Backed into a corner with nowhere left to hide, the prosecution aggressively pressured Devlin, forcing him to plead guilty to his sickening crimes. When the judge finally handed down the sentence, it was designed to utterly crush the devil standing before the court. Michael Devlin was slapped with an astronomical, unprecedented penalty: 74 consecutive life sentences, plus an additional 2,020 years in federal prison. It was a mathematical guarantee that this predator would never ever have a single chance to see the light of day again. He will take his final, wretched breath completely isolated behind cold concrete and heavy iron bars. But while the legal system delivered its own righteous brand of justice, the brutal reality of prison life quickly caught up with him. Predators like Devlin sit at the absolute bottom of the food chain behind bars. Karma eventually came to collect. Right inside the prison walls, Devlin was viciously attacked by a fellow inmate, who cornered him and stabbed him dozens of times with a sharp homemade weapon. Although he survived the bloody assault, the blood-chilling message was sent loud and clear. The man who spent years inflicting paralyzing terror on helpless children would now spend the rest of his pathetic life looking over his shoulder, living in constant, suffocating fear. I couldn't stop thinking about how perfectly poetic that retribution truly is. But the most beautiful part of this entire harrowing saga isn't the villain's ultimate downfall. It's the incredible, unbreakable resilience of the survivors. Against all odds, these two boys refused to let a monster dictate the rest of their stories. Ben Ownby fought hard to reclaim the normalcy that was violently stolen from him. He seamlessly returned to school, went back to the Boy Scouts, and eventually headed off to college to chase his dreams in video game production. Shawn Hornbeck's road to recovery was undeniably steeper after enduring 4.5 years of extreme psychological torment. But his spirit was never truly broken. He bravely put the shattered pieces of his life back together, eventually finding love, getting married, and experiencing the profound healing joy of becoming a father. He built a beautiful family of his own, rooted entirely in love rather than fear. The profound bond forged between the Ownby and Hornbeck families is a powerful testament to the triumph of hope. When the two families finally embraced in tears, the agonizing pain of the past was closed forever by the promise of a bright, beautiful rebirth. Finally, after years of unimaginable pain and darkness, justice was served. The monster was locked away in a cage where he belongs, and two boys got to take their lives back. What do you guys think? Does this ending bring you any sense of relief? I'll keep digging if there's more to uncover. Thanks for watching and for all the comments you guys make this worth it.